wisdom, as love, of strength, and of beauty. It is a universe that science cannot touch, but to which it could also elevate itself if it so desired. There's no reason why the scientist could not be a great mystic or a great spiritual leader, because both the material and the spiritual are locked within himself. He is that which he has released at the present time. That which is yet to be released can cause him also to be not only a scientist, but a saint, if he wants to be. So everywhere in this world, there is this constant struggle to get hold of the values, by means of which we can escape the tyrannies of circumstance. Also in this same thought, knowing the mind, as the Bhagavad Gita says, and no doubt Buddha read that in his own day, the mind is the slayer of the real. The mind is very largely responsible for the trouble. It is not responsible because it is bad. There's nothing bad about a mind, but a mind misused can be the most dangerous thing in all the world. A mind that is not refined and regenerated by love and friendship is completely a despot, a tyrant. And it leads the owner of that mind to destruction in almost every instance. There is nothing that adds more to the suffering of the individual than the misuse of his own mind. To recover from this misuse does not mean that the individual should cease to think, but he should begin to think in terms of value. He should think with the universe instead of against it. He should think of those things necessary to the common good and not those things which destroy the common good. The mind can be a magnificent and beautiful instrument. It can also be a terrible thing. And in the illumination of Buddha under the Bodhi tree, it is said that there was a kind of an atomic fission, a tremendous explosion of energy, of mind within him. It was the mind that became the universal energy and overcame the personal. Universal mind, more or less, was given the right to manifest through him. He gave it that right himself. Buddha never claimed to be an avatar, never claimed to be a god, never claimed to be an agent of God. Buddha never claimed to be anything but a simple human being who, looking around and seeing what was happening, thought something ought to be done about it. And in order to create his philosophy, he accepted nothing that was not demonstrable to him in the simple course of his own lifetime. For 80 years, he wandered the roads and paths of Bengal, and during that time he saw every type of experience of which the individual is capable of enduring. He saw birth, he saw growth, he saw death. He found all the different scenes and sights and symbols of human achievement and decay. He saw great palaces filled with misery. He saw hovels with joy and beauty. He saw the wise and the semi-wise and the unwise. He saw the sophisticate and the natural and simple childlike person. He experienced all of these things, and he had to fit it in, all of it, into one great comprehensive plan. A plan which man can intuit. A plan which man may not fully understand, but one thing he can understand. Namely, he knows when he breaks it. He knows when he does wrong. And from constantly learning what is wrong, he must ultimately gain the inner vision to know what is right. And he knows that what is right is harmless. That what is right protects every part of the person. And those who followed in his path, his arhats and their disciples, gradually reduced the power of pain and misery in themselves. There is a painting in the back of the lecture hall here on the nirvana of the Buddha, a Japanese rendering of an ancient Chinese painting. Here the master is lying on a couch of death surrounded by his disciples. The disciples are all sad. looking greatly deprived, except Ananda. Ananda is looking up through the sorrow of the others, smiling beautifully. Ananda knows the truth. And in that in itself we have the mystery of the loss of suffering due to the sense of loss. Ananda knew the truth about the passing of the Master. Therefore, he did not suffer. Buddha knew the mystery of all things that change, and therefore the transition is to be met in peace and understanding and charity and insight and kindness and forgiveness. He also taught that every grudge can be likened to a psychological germ bringing sickness to those who hold it. Every prejudice, every unreasonable attitude, any pressureful or extreme attitude, even one of a highly spiritual nature, must be carefully examined. Where the person loses his inner poise and expresses an emotion or an attitude that is excessive, there is too much pressure. And what is pressure? Pressure is a cause of suffering. Wherever there is pressure, there will be suffering. Now, nature has provided man with a certain equipment to protect him from suffering. He has resources within the endocrine system, particularly in the suprarenals, which enable him to meet a stressful situation with poise and dignity. But if this stress goes on year by year and he never controls himself, the resources of the body are exhausted and it begins to fail under an abuse of attitudes. Man can destroy his own body by abusing with his attitudes that body. So everywhere the individual must learn to reduce stress. I have noticed in talking with people that nearly always they get excited when they're wrong. They become more pressureful. They do not realize this, but they become defensive. If they are right, it needs no defense. The Buddhist philosophy says if you're right, you don't have to defend. If you're wrong, you can't defend. Therefore, keep quiet and behave yourself. This is very useful. It saves energy. And it would probably add from 5 to 10 years to every person's life in a comparatively healthy condition if he would stop abusing his own attitudes. If he would prevent himself from hating, disliking, grudging. If he would stop blaming this and blaming that and settle down to being what he ought to be, his health would improve and would be possible, very likely, to balance the national budget on this point alone. Because think how much we could save in welfare and Medicare and old age pensions if people were happy, busy, and productive to the end of life. It would not be the same type of world. And we are wearing out this world by simply abusing every resource there is in it. And then when we try to correct the situation, everyone hates us and organizes to maintain the corruptions. Therefore, you cannot do it that way. The only way you can do it is to recognize an over-government or an over-world that must be obeyed. In Buddhism, as Dr. Amasaki, who is an expert on Buddhist symbolic art in Japan, observed, the universe of Buddhism is not a kingdom. The universe of Buddhism is a commonwealth. Buddhism does not teach a tyranny of executive force anywhere in the universe. It is indeed a commonwealth which is created as it is created in order that it may gradually become a psychically socialized existence. The commonwealth of the world, of the universe, of cosmos, is also interpreted in the forms of a cosmotheism, namely that existence itself, this vast expanse, is all of it an expression of the divine mind. The universal thought produces it all. The universal thought is eternal and can never be wrong. The universal thought has unfolded through every form of life that is known to us. Every thought, every form is one of the temporary passing musings of an eternal thinker. This vast theism is absolutely organized, but it is organized not by an artificial mind forcing organization upon it. It is organized because every atom is organized in its own structure. Organization is inherent in any structure that exists in nature, from the smallest microbe to the vastest galaxy. These things do not have law and order thrust upon them by an external power. That law and order of their kind is within themselves, eternal, inevitable, unchangeable. And that law and order asks and requires and demands the fulfillment of its own purpose. And when the law and order in the living things becomes the rule of those things grow, live, and fulfill themselves. When they go against the plan is so much bigger than they are that they do not have a chance of success. They can never succeed except by obeying not somebody else's will, but the eternal within themselves, which is properly integrated for the species to which they belong. Humanity has its own laws. It has its own rights. It has its own purposes. And these are inherent in every human being. They're in every cell of the body and in the great compound of the cells which we call the personality. All these things are moved by rules, rules which are intended for only one purpose, to prevent suffering. If man himself continues to abuse these rules and causes suffering, then the rules still operate because they begin to point out the law and the path that leads to the end of suffering. The individual who suffers from a mistake must recover by correcting the mistake. If you have a certain physical ailment that is annoying or something, you go to your doctor and he tells you not to do this or to do that, and you will feel better. In nature, you don't get someone telling you, but through experience, you make a mistake and it hurts. You make a mistake in selecting of a friend, and the friend isn't true to you. And you must ask yourself, what caused you to select for your friend a person who wasn't worthy? And the chances are 100 to 1. You will find that you chose that person because that person apparently was going to be serviceable to you for some purpose. That you made the friend to advantage something of your own, and therefore you were deceived. You deceived yourself by allowing your motives to blind you to your integrities. All these things become part of a strong Buddhist philosophy of life. They are part of the way in which the doctrine has descended, and probably will, in one way or another, be absorbed into practically every culture that we know. It conspires against nothing. It is not basically a creed. It doesn't even need to be named. It is not something that was dreamed up by a person. It is merely the ability of the individual to understand his own nature and to find out how he operates by watching himself operate. He must serve apprentice to his own principles in order to learn. And when he sees that he is not getting the results that are good for him, he must change his ways. And he will find nearly always that when he realizes that he needs to change his ways, what he ought to do will become apparent to him. Nature is not a tyrant. It is a very generous and indulgent power. But it has a great project, and that project is to perfect